And then I wake up on the floor in the kitchen like, He goes, old enough to talk to me like a man, old enough to get your ass beat like one.
Rick Harrison built a car empire worth millions. Over 30 classic vehicles filled his garages. His prized 1940 Chevy Deluxe sat alongside Ferraris and NASCAR tributes. But then the bills started piling up. $65,000. Monthly alimony payments. His own mother suing him for $500,000. Legal fees crushing his cash flow. In 2025, something changed. Rick started making strange decisions about his beloved collection. He passed on a $100,000 Ferrari. He lowballed on cars he once would have bought instantly. What's really happening behind the Pawn Star's fortune? Rick Harrison was just 8 when his world broke apart. It started in 1973. Lying in bed at the family's home in San Diego when his head suddenly buzzed like tangled power lines. His body locked up, his tongue tore like hamburger meat. When it was over, he couldn't walk. Doctors called it focal onset aware seizures, but to Rick, it just meant pain. It happened every month for the next 10 years. The seizures damaged his muscles so badly he sometimes couldn't get out of bed for weeks. Ice packs wrapped around his legs. Sometimes he missed more than 200 days of school in a single year. He spent his childhood trapped between hospital visits and silent rooms, listening to the buzz in his skull and waiting for the next one to hit. While other kids played baseball, Rick read books. His mom brought him the Great Brain series from the library, and he fell in love with a boy named Tom, who pulled clever money-making schemes in small-town Utah. Rick devoured all 8 books in less than 2 weeks. He wanted to be Tom. He wanted to win. Then came history books. By age 12, Rick was reading about 18th century naval warfare, ancient coins, and obscure battles that most adults had never even heard of. Alone in his room, sweating from seizures, he unknowingly trained his brain for the job he'd become famous for decades later. He could spot details most people missed. He remembered everything. But life outside that bedroom was cruel. At Taft Middle School, the bullying never stopped. Kids mocked him for being different, for missing school, for twitching in his seat or looking pale and strange. He couldn't play sports. He couldn't run. He lived in fear of seizing in front of everyone. So he kept his head down and studied human behavior instead. Every insult taught him how people think. Every lonely lunch trained him to read faces and see weaknesses, what others called social rejection. Rick turned into survival training. Then everything collapsed. In 1981, when Rick was 16, his family lost everything. His mom, Joanne, had built a strong real estate business in the 70s, but the recession hit hard. Mortgage interest rates exploded to 18%. The housing market died overnight. Rick's dad, Richard, had just left the Navy after 20 years to help with the business. It was the worst timing imaginable. They lost $1 million. They had only $5,000 left in their bank account, barely enough to start over. So, they left California behind. They packed up, drove across the desert, and landed in Las Vegas, hoping the lights would save them. It was a full reset. By then, Rick had already dropped out of 10th grade. School didn't make sense to him anymore. He was making $2,000 a week selling fake Gucci bags out of the San Diego garment district. That's over $7,000 a week today. He was 15. He'd buy knockoff bags for $30 and sell them for $300. When the competition undercut him, he switched to fake jeans. He built a whole underground empire while most teens were still playing arcade games. His dad was furious when he quit school, but he couldn't argue with the money. It lasted nearly 2 years. Then the market dried up and Rick started looking for the next hustle. In 1982, something even bigger happened. His girlfriend Kim got pregnant. Rick was only 17, but then tragedy struck. She had a miscarriage. Most teenage couples wouldn't survive that kind of loss, but Rick and Kim got married anyway. Just months later, she got pregnant again. On April 27, 1983, their son Corey was born. Rick was 18. 2 years later, Adam arrived. But life with 2 babies and no money quickly became too much. In 1985, Kim walked out. She dropped the kids off and never came back. Rick was just 20, now a single father with 2 toddlers and a pile of unpaid bills. He had to pawn his comic book collection just to keep the lights on. Every day was survival. Vegas didn't offer easy answers. Rick sold bootleg VHS tapes on the street. He flipped cars in shady deals. In one stunt, he even used a winch truck to steal a car from a dealership service bay, driving off like he owned it. He got arrested for selling fake designer goods. He ran newspaper route scams. It wasn't pretty, but it kept food on the table. Every hustle sharpened his instincts. Every shady deal taught him how to assess value, spot lies, and read desperation. He was building a skill set without even knowing it. Back in the hospital waiting rooms, Rick started buying antique coins. He was 12 the first time he walked into a shop and picked up a Civil War-era piece. Something clicked. The weight, the patina, the story behind the metal. It all made sense. He bought more. He read everything. He studied how coins were minted, how artifacts aged, how fakes looked under light. His memory was perfect. His obsession with history, mixed with real-world hustling, created something rare. A kid who could both charm you and outthink you at the same time. That rare mix came from something darker. Rick had lost his sister Sherry when he was just a toddler. She was 6 when she died from health complications. The family never spoke much about it. But Rick felt the loss in the silence that followed. It changed how they all moved through the world. His parents carried the grief with them every day. Rick learned early that life could end without warning. That lesson stayed with him. He didn't trust happiness. He planned for disaster. And that's why when life broke down in 1981, he didn't fall apart. He adapted. He remembered. He rebuilt. In April 1981, Rick Harrison was just 16 when he arrived in Las Vegas with his family, and barely $5,000 left in their name. His father's dreams of a Navy retirement had collapsed, and the desert city became their last hope. Rick got a job bussing tables in a casino, scrubbing dishes for $335 an hour while still attending high school. But by night, he was doing something else entirely. He was repossessing cars from people who had stopped paying their loans, driving through dangerous neighborhoods where one wrong move could get him hurt. Some nights he earned more doing that than he did all month cleaning tables. His parents opened a tiny coin shop on Las Vegas Boulevard, just 300 square feet, barely big enough to move around. That's where Rick saw what desperation really looked like. He watched gamblers stumble in and pawn their wedding rings for $20 loans, often at just 13 cents on the dollar. He memorized their faces. He started learning the game, and soon he began selling counterfeit designer bags on the side, pulling in $2,000 a week. Far more than school could ever offer. By 10th grade, he dropped out. Vegas was teaching him faster. But Rick wanted more than coins and fake Gucci. He wanted a pawn license. The problem was Las Vegas law only allowed one license per 50,000 people. In 1981, the city wasn't big enough, so Rick waited. Every single week for nearly 2 years, he called the city statistician, asking for the latest population count. It became a joke in City Hall. He didn't care. In 1989, When the population finally hit 250,000, Rick saw his opening. But he wasn't the only one. Other pawn shop owners had paid politicians to block newcomers. The courtroom fights cost Rick and his father $15,000. But one day, the judge started hammering the opposition. Rick knew in that moment he had won. When the call came, he said, "I just hit the lottery," and he meant it. He opened the first 24-hour pawn shop in America at 7113 Las Vegas Boulevard South. The shop wasn't safe. Not even close. This was the 1980s and the mafia still had a grip on Vegas. Rick dealt with mob-connected customers who brought in stolen goods hoping to clean the money. He once held a $10,000 Rolex Submariner in his hands knowing it was probably hot, and gave the man $500 for it. No questions asked? He learned how to recognize stolen casino chips. He started buying rare mob memorabilia. One day, a loan went bad and the customers came back armed. After that, Rick kept loaded guns behind the counter and hired security. Every deal came with a risk. He lived in that tension every single day. Then came the slot machine. In 1986, a casino was selling off old gear, and Rick spotted a 1930s Watling roller top. The seller claimed it was worth $25,000. Rick had read every book he could find on antique gambling machines. He realized this one was a rare prototype worth $75,000. He borrowed $50,000 against it, nearly his entire yearly inventory when the shop was only making $250,000. It was a huge gamble. 3 months later he sold it to a museum for $85,000 and made a $35,000 profit. That deal saved the shop and gave Rick a new reputation. People started bringing him high-end collectibles. That slot machine became the model for how he did business for the next 30 years. At home, Rick's life was no smoother. He married Kim in 1982 when she was pregnant, right after a miscarriage. He was just 17. By 1985, the shop had taken over his life. He worked 16-hour days and the marriage didn't survive. In 1986, he married Tracy after a blind date and blended his 2 sons, Corey and Adam, into a new family. Times were tight. Rick started selling guns through the shop without a federal license. It brought fast money, but also trouble. The ATF began investigating when some of those weapons turned up in violent crimes. He was walking a thin line. His marriage to Tracy lasted 25 years, but the early years were built on 80-hour work weeks. 3 kids under 10, and hustling fake Gucci bags just to get by. By 1989, Rick officially became co-owner of the shop at 24 years old. Business grew fast. By 2005, he and his father were lending out $3 million a year and earning $700,000 in interest, but the shop became a magnet for addicts. People pawned Rolexes just to get gas money to drive home. Most never came back. Rick took their jewelry, their cars sometimes, even their homes. The 120-day loan window came and went, and he had no choice but to take what was left. It was brutal, but that's how the business worked. In the 1990s, Rick made another big move. Someone brought in what looked like a Confederate officer's sword from Gettysburg. It had been bought for just $75. Rick knew how to check tang markings, how to tell the difference between a fake and the real thing. He figured out it wasn't just a regular saber. It was an 1836-foot artillery sword. He brought in an expert to confirm it, paid $15,000 for it, and later sold it for $75,000. That deal made him a legend in the pawn community. People started trusting his eye for history. But it wasn't all smooth. His father still owned 51% of the business and refused to let go. The two clashed constantly. One fight was over a Ferrari that came in from a bankrupt gambler. Rick saw the potential. He restored it, detailed it, and flipped it for $200,000 heirs. His dad didn't like the risk, but Rick knew how to turn desperation into profit. That's what he'd always done. When the dot crash hit in 2000, Rick saw another opening. Tech workers flooded Vegas, pawning everything. Rick focused hard on sports memorabilia. He learned how to spot fake autographs, how to read signature patterns, how to prove a jersey was game-worn. One seller brought in a Muhammad Ali glove and pawned it for $5,000. Rick confirmed it was real. When the guy